Music, Excel worksheet, scales, intervals, modes, and more. Get ready and some coffee, because with the help of Excel, music theory will be defeated. Which I know actually makes music theory less attractive to all those foot fetish people. But, for the rest of us, music theory being defeated is actually a good thing, because it makes music theory less stinky. Here we are in Excel. If you don't have access to this workbook, that's okay, because we'll basically build this from a blank worksheet, and hopefully we'll be able to provide this workbook to you as well, so you can use it in whatever way you so choose. However, I do think it's useful to actually construct the workbook both from an Excel theory standpoint and a music theory standpoint, and I do recognize that most people are probably not equally interested in those two topics, Excel and music theory, and the people that are interested in Excel, I think, are probably more open-minded to apply what they're learning to different topics such as music, as long as we get to practice putting together our tables, looking at the links between the tables, putting together our formulas, formatting, and so on and so forth, which we will be doing as we put together this presentation. If we're interested in music and music theory, it's probably less likely that you're interested in Excel. However, I really do think that Excel is a great tool to map out the concepts in music theory and kind of shuffle them around so we can look at them from different angles. Even just the fretboard, I think, is mapping out in Excel is the best tool to me, and I'll try to explain that here. And even if you're not totally familiar with Excel, we will be walking through building this in a step-by-step process. So even some fairly complex formulas and connections between tables, we'll try to map out pretty basically, so hopefully everybody will be able to follow along. However, if you're not interested in Excel, I think it would still be useful to follow along and basically write out these tables just in a piece of paper or on a piece of paper, because looking at the relationship between the tables gives you a good idea. It gives another angle, another view of the concepts related to music theory and how to all these things kind of tie together, which is one of the reasons that I like to do these things, because oftentimes I realize that when I think I know something, I then try to explain it, and when I try to explain it, I realize I don't know it as well as I could, because I can't really formulate or articulate what I'm trying to say in a reasonable way. And if I was able to do that, I find that opens up different connections in my mind, and allows me to rotate concepts around much more easily. So that's why I call myself like a soul tuber on YouTube, right? So even if people weren't watching the videos I create or even the courses that I made, I think it's still useful to do, because it's a great learning process to better understand things. So I just happen to be lucky enough that I make enough stuff that some of it people find useful enough to make a living on. But even when I wasn't making a living on it, I still kind of tended to do that, because, like I say, I think it's useful to learning concepts. That said, I also think that if you wanted to just even take this worksheet, deconstruct it, and remake your own presentations, just demonstrating the same concepts, I'm totally okay with people doing that type of thing. I wouldn't think of it as like plagiarism and whatnot if you're reconstructing the table for, again, multiple reasons. I think even if you don't get any views if you were to post it, or even if you don't post it to any kind of social media or anything like that, you'll be able to better understand it if you put the thing together with a mindset of you're going to try to explain it to somebody. And if you do put it up on the social medias or whatnot, then a lot of times people are interested even if you don't fully grasp the concept, because you're kind of closer to where they are in the learning curve. We tend to like to watch people that are closer to kind of to where we are in learning things. And of course, you might have a different demonstration style than someone else like me. People might look at me and say, hey, look, he's referring to movies from like the 90s and 80s, and you can make one yourself and refer to maybe even older movies, or you can refer to like TikTok videos or YouTube videos or something like that, which I would have no idea about, but certain niche of audience might. And so so you might be able to reach more people with the same information. Even if, like, I don't know, for example, Excel as well as like the Excel is Fun guy, at least in terms of the range of knowledge that he has with it, with all the different kind of functionalities with it. But as an accountant and with my own experiences and whatnot, I think I have a particular angle on Excel, and I think I reach a different audience. So I think that is useful, and I think the same thing would apply on the music side of things. I'm not a music theory expert because I haven't been schooled in music or anything like that. I've just been playing the guitar for 20 years or something and trying to put the thing together. And I think that actual perspective is useful to many people and kind of connects differently than people that have gone through, maybe have a lot more formal knowledge. I think learning from both those things are good. You're just going to get different perspectives. So in any case, that's my idea with it. So I put a worksheet on this together before, but I think this one is better. So let me try to explain why I think it is better, and then we'll start building this through our presentations here. I think it's just more efficient. The tables are more efficient, so I'm not doing as much repetitive stuff on the tables. And then we're also going to try to put in the modalities in a way into our worksheet that I think is going to be more clear so that we can see the relationship between our different scales more easily as we use our worksheet for like our practice work. We're also going to input the intervals table and try to map out the intervals in such a way that it's going to be easier for us to basically recognize those. I've mapped out the patterns. These are the whole half patterns for each of the modes. And we'll also look at basically the relative positions, looking at all the modes and looking at the relative positions compared to the major scale. And I'm going to try to view the modes a little bit differently in our worksheet, which I'll explain shortly. And then we also have our intervals. So we can I've mapped out a table here looking at all of the intervals, meaning the distance from the first note into the scale. And this is worksheet in and of itself is a great worksheet just to have in mind, because you could start to look at your fretboard and build things out rather than just by memorizing the finger position by looking at the different intervals. And I've noticed a lot of people, that's one way a lot of people kind of approach the guitar, which seems to be very practical, although scary at first. It's a little bit intimidating at first, but bear with me, because even though it looks intimidating, it's just like a teddy bear. So it looks scary. It looks scary at first, but it's not. But bear with me, because it's just, if you get closer, it's just a teddy bear. So then we're going to be putting together our worksheet. So this is the meat of it, meaning this is the worksheet I would put together when I'm actually kind of noodling around possibly on the guitar and comparing that to our fretboard. So this is going to be our fretboard in numbers, and this is going to be the same thing with the letters. Now, noting my theory here on the fretboard is that this is basically tablature when I map out the fretboard, but I'm going to put the low string on top, which you might say, well, the high string should go on top. And so I've explained this before, same theory here that I've done before, but just for people that haven't done the prior worksheet and are on this latest and greatest one, remember, here's our guitar, and I just want to note that how the tablature typically works. If I was trying to map out these strings, if I'm looking at the guitar, this dot represents the low string, which is why when I'm looking at the guitar this way, if I was to turn it around this way, now you can see what happens is that low string is on the bottom, and that's why we end up with these fretboards with tablature with the low E string on the bottom, whereas when we play it, we're behind the guitar where the low E string is on the top. So to me, and I'm a little dyslexic, so this might be a bigger deal to me than in other people, but I really think that if you're learning the guitar, it's easier to visualize the tablature as though you're behind the guitar. So this is my theory. This is my contribution, my music theory movement here. If you wanna jump on board with my music theory movement, which I put some catchphrases for. I call it the top string on top movement. And that means that if there's any computer programmers and like people that put together databases, I think we should take all the tablature and make it so we have the top string on top, right? So in other words, like you can see tablature like this, and I see this is more and more popular, which makes more sense to people, I think, because now they're reading it from left to right, where the low string is at least on the left now. Because that makes sense, because when I'm looking at the guitar, the low string is on top because I'm behind the guitar. But I think the easiest way to look at it for most people is actually to say, I'm going to view it this way and flip the guitar, which is actually what I do when I use my worksheets. Instead of having the guitar facing the other way, I'm going to flip the guitar. And so now you end up looking like it's a left-handed guitar, but really you have the low string on top now. So, and really with the fretboard, you can kind of imagine as though we have the guitar turned around, and then we're imprinting the guitar as though we're behind the guitar, taking the strings face up and planting the strings on here, so that so we're seeing through the back of the guitar. So that means when I put together my presentations, I'm going to have my fretboard up here, low E string on top, reading from left to right, and then I'm also going to be playing the guitar, which looks like it's left-handed because I'm going to flip the guitar. I'm not left-handed. Well, I kind of am, but I don't play the guitar left-handed. And then you can see that when you see it, everything's going from left to right. So that means that when you're playing the guitar, you can read your position behind the guitar from left to right. When you're looking at the tablature, you're looking at it from left to right with the low string on top. And when you're looking at my guitar that I'm playing, it looks like I'm left-handed, but it's going from left to right. So that's going to be my idea. That's my top string on top music movement that I'm putting together. And so anybody who I think we should be taking all tablature and making the top string on top with it and making a database in case anyone's interested in that. Okay, so now the other thing I advocate for here is also having the absolute numbers of the notes. And if I number the notes, there's only 12 notes, then I have something that I can use some math equations for. That takes a little bit more memorization, because now I have to be able to switch from code switching from number to letter, but it gives me the ability to do simple math, making intervals easier to deal with. So we'll talk about that later. And then the worksheet over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to map out the notes in the key that I'm in. I'm going to do it numerically first, so these are absolute numbers, and then we'll use the X lookup table to pull in the information down here. Now this worksheet is similar to the one that I've done in the past, but it's more streamlined. It doesn't have as much stuff up top, and that means the fretboard is almost the same size as this. This is only one cell longer, which allows us to have multiple of these fretboards on top of each other, which is one of the benefits. So I can map out things on one fretboard and then map out the same thing on another fretboard, which we'll take a look at shortly. Now, to construct this thing, I'm going to say that we're going to start with the key of C, because the key of C is a good check figure to make sure that we're not making mistakes. Because if we end up with anything that has a sharp or flat in it, we know there's an error. So we have like an internal control, kind of like the double entry accounting system, right? It needs to be in balance. Well, in the key of C, you need to have everything not having sharps and flats, and that's going to give us a double check, an internal control, to make sure that everything is mapping out correctly. Once we've mapped it out correctly for the key of C, then I should be able to simply change the key with this blue bit up here, changing it to any other key. So if I go up to 5 or 6 is going to be a D, right? And I'll talk about the numbering system in a second. It should apply out properly as long as I got all the formulas in there correctly, which hopefully we have. So then I've got the numbering system. So we have 7 out of 12 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now I also want to start thinking about the modes, because usually when we count this out, we say, okay, if I was to build a chord on this, we're going to say the 1 is major, the 2 is minor, the 3 is minor, the 4 is major, the 5 is major, the 6 is minor, and the 7 is diminished. Sometimes people often represent this by saying I'm going to have the Roman numerals upper and lowercase. So this uppercase 1 represents that if I was to build a chord off of this one note, it would be a major chord, a triad that is. If I was to build a chord off of this one because it has a lowercase Roman numeral 2, it would be a minor triad. This one has a Roman numeral 3, so the third is a minor. And then this one has a capital Roman numeral, so it would be a major. This would be a major, and then a minor, and then a diminished, which means it's not just the third that's the distinguishing factor, but also the flat fifth. So that's good, but really that's only telling us what's going on with the third here, basically, down to the diminished, which has a flat fifth as well, because it's basically telling us the interval of the third, which is distinguishing, that's the distinguishing factor for the triads, 3-note chords, the major triads having a 4-note away major third, the minor triads having a 3-note away minor third. But when you look at it that way, you start to think that, like, for example, this 2 right here, if I was looking at the major scale, which is what this is mapped off on, and I'm going to use, like most people in Western music do, the major scale as our kind of key that we're always going to compare everything to. Noting, though, that it's really just another mode. I could use any of the other scales as the key to compare everything to. It's just that, of course, the major scale is the most common key, so it's pretty much universally used as the thing we compare everything to. So that's why we'll use that one. So if I'm in the key of C, which is also the Ionian scale from a modal standpoint, I can look at these notes. These are 7 out of 12 notes, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and I can map it out this way, but I can also map it out this way. So here's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If I map it out this way, I'm going to say we're starting on the C, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. Now, what is this going out over here? There's only 7, but I'm going to the 9, 10, and the 11. Why do I do that? Because usually when we build the chords, what we do is take every other note. So I'm going to say we have the C, we have the 1, we have the 3, and then we have the 5. And that's going to be the triad. But I could keep going and take the 7. Now I can keep going from there, but I have nothing else to skip and go back to. Really what I'm doing is I'm picking back up the 2, which is a D. But I'm not going to call it the 2 because that would be confusing, because I'm taking the 1, 3, 5. Instead, I'm going to call it the 9. So I'm going to call it a 9. That means the 9 is equivalent, in essence, at least in tone, to the 2. And the 11 is equivalent to the 4. And the 13 is equivalent to the 6. Now, note that you can see this if we make a circle out of it even easier, right? So here I have the same notes, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, back to C. If I go in a circle, I can go, here's my C, I skip that to go to the E, and then I skip that to go to the G. There's my triad. But if I keep going, I could skip this and go to the B. Now I've run out of notes. But if it's in a circle, I skip the C again and I go back to the D, which is the second, but I'm not going to call it the second. I was on 7, I'm going to call it the 9. And then I skip the E and I go back to the F, and then I skip the G and I go back to the A. Now I've basically just mapped out all of the notes that are in, the key, but I did so by skipping every other note. That's basically what we do with the chord construction. So that means that these are kind of repetitive. If I want to look at it in terms of chords, I could just hide. I can hide the 2, right? And say I'm going to hide this, I'm going to hide the 4, and I'm going to hide the 6. So that now I have just this format. I've got the 1, 3, 5, and then 7, 9, 11, and 12, noting that the 9, 11, and 12 are equivalent to, in essence, the 2, the 4, and the 6, right? That's the general idea. So I'm going to unhide, but then I can unhide those and say unhide, and I can also see this in terms of the related modalities, because if I look at the Dorian, we say that that has been constructed in a minor, it's a minor chord. So we think of major, minor, which is represented by the lowercase Roman numeral, minor, major, major, minor, and then the diminished. That's going to be, if we were to make chords in the key of C, those are the chords that we could basically make in terms of triads. But when I look at the second one, it is a minor, but really I'm not really thinking of it in terms of, if we're looking at the related mode, it's not the related Aeolian or minor mode, it's the Dorian mode, which is a minor mode, right? And so in other words, if I took these notes, I started on the 2 and counted down, just like then I can do that crossways this way, right? So I'm basically starting on the D and just counting the same notes, all the natural notes, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and so this is basically the same notes in the Dorian. So in other words, I can think of the 2 note as basically mapping out the Dorian, and it's a minor mode because if I took the 1, 3, 5, this third has a minor third, a 3 note away minor third instead of a 4 note away. And so, but it's not really the minor scale that we're thinking about. It's kind of the Dorian scale, whereas this one is a Phrygian, also a minor mode. So if I started on this E and I took the same notes, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, same notes, and it creates a minor chord if I take the 1, 3, 5, because this third is once again a minor third away as opposed to a major third, but I'm not really looking at the E minor scale. If it's the related mode to the C major, I'm looking at the Phrygian mode, which you can see if you added more than just 3 notes. If we mapped out the 7th, the 9, and the 13, the 7, the 9, and the 13, you're going to have intervals that are different than the intervals on the Aeolian or minor mode. And then the Lydian is a major mode, which means if you build a 1, 3, 5 on it, the third is going to have a major third. But it's not like when we go over here to the F, we're going to build an F major triad, but it's not really the F major scale, it's really a major mode. It's the Lydian mode. So if I went to the 7th, the 9th, the 11th, and the 12th, they would have different intervals possibly than the Ionian. And then the Mixolydian, again, major mode, the triad that we would build on it has right. And then here's the Aeolian is the minor mode. So this one would build a minor triad, and it would actually be the full minor scale, right? And then you've got the Locrian, which is the weird one, which has a minor third and a flat fifth. So that's why I think this is a little bit more detailed. And then we've got the intervals. Now this is mapping out the intervals, and I'm going to give the intervals as compared to the root, in this case the C. So each of these positions, you can call this a perfect first. The second is going to be a major second, which is 2 notes away. That's what that 2 stands for up front. And then this is a 4 note away. This E is 4 notes away from the C. That's why the 8 minus the 4 is useful, which makes it a major third. And then this is a perfect fourth because it's 5 notes away. And this 9 minus the 4 would make that apparent. And then this one is a perfect fifth, which is 7 notes away, 11 minus 4. And this one is major 6, which is 9 notes away, which is a little confusing because this 1, you can think of it as like a 13, or right, because it goes around the horn. So when you're looking at the distance, there's only 12 notes. And then this one's a major 7, which is 11 notes away. So we can think about it in terms of intervals. And I think this is a cleaner way to map out the intervals than what I had before. And then, of course, on this worksheet, we can then highlight this worksheet and use our, so if I wanted to put these side by side and play my guitar with it and try to map this out onto my fretboard and say, okay, I'm going to hide maybe this, I'm going to hide this, and then I can hide this, and then I can hide this and put these together. And then maybe I want to map out just the triad here on my fretboard. So I can take my fretboard and notice, like, I might not need the full fretboard, but I don't have to hide anything over here like I did before because I can just look at the fretboard I need. So that's another reason I think this construction is better. But if I highlight this and I can go to my conditional formatting, home tab, style, conditional formatting, and I'm going to say I want to make this equal to the C, I'm going to make that green. So there's my root. And then I want to make this equal to the E here. Let's make that red. And then I want to make this equal to the G, and let's make that yellow. So now I can map out the 1, 3, 5, just like we saw in my prior worksheet as well. And I could hide the worksheet below, hide this one so I don't see the numbers part. I'm going to hide that. And so now I have the related mode right underneath it. So this is just taking, this is the same notes here, which are now here, but now I'm seeing it as this is the Dorian mode. And I can also map out now, if that's the Dorian, I'm going to call the Dorian mode number 2, and I'm going to label it with a II, because that shows that it's a minor mode, meaning it's going to have a minor triad that it starts off with, and that gives me an ability to see the related mode to its major, right? So if I say I'm in D Dorian, it's related to the C, major, right? So these are all the same notes here, but I'm just reorganizing it, and I have another fretboard which I can then map out based on the Dorian, or I can map it out based on this information up top as well, and be able to have these fretboards close enough together that they're pretty easily seen together. I can even hide one more here, and then I can see them kind of right on top of each other. So that gives me an easy way to see the modes. I can hide all of these ones, hide, and then I can see all of the modes on top of each other, hide like this, hide, and then Mixolydian, and then here's the Aeolian, hide, and so on. So now I can see each of these modes, hide. Actually, I don't need this top bit. I can just hide that whole thing, hide. Now I can see each of the modes kind of on top of each other. So, and maybe I should have kept the space, but you have the space between the fretboards, and I have multiple fretboards that I can then work on and possibly map out different chords that I'm looking at that are in the same worksheet over here, or that are possibly part of the different modes. So I think that's more efficient than what I had before, whereas all the modes, all the related modes were on the side, and I had to scroll to the right to find them. But I can also, the other common thing is to see, I want to see the modes, I want to see the related modes. So if this was I want to switch not from the C major to the D Dorian, but from the C major to the C Dorian. So I can have the complementary modes by just changing my key. So I'm going to unhide this, And so unhide this bit up top. Unhide. So now if this is a 4, I could say, okay, instead of changing this to a 6, which is the second, which is done automatically, I'm going to change this to keep it to be the 4. So now what happens is that's going to convert this second bit to be in the key of C. So now I have the Dorian, but it's not in the related mode. It's in the, I think it's called the complementary mode. So now I'm calculating the Dorian in the key of C instead of in the key of D, which is the other common way to look at these things, right? We could see it, and I could switch that instead of having the related modes on the right and then the complementary modes underneath or something like that. I could just switch the key so that I can have either one that I want, right? So I can say this is either going to be the Dorian, which will be the default, so they're all related modes, or I think it's called the complementary mode. I can keep that in the key of C, and so now I've got the Dorian in the key of C, and I can do that all the way down if I so choose. So it's a little bit more, it's a little less automated that way, but I think that is a little bit cleaner to work with. So that's the general idea. So what are we going to do to construct this? We will start off with just the alphabet. I'm going to say A, and I'm going to represent sharps and flats with just a lowercase of the two, because this can be an A sharp or a B flat. So I'm going to call that lowercase AB just for Excel purposes, because I think that's easy to do. B, C, and then C sharp, D flat, D, D sharp, E flat, E, F, F sharp, G flat, G, and then G sharp or A flat, and then it goes back to A. I'm going to number those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. These are absolute numbers, and I think it's useful to be able to go back code switching in your head from the letters to the numbers. And that allows you to do some simple math in some situations, which is why on the fretboard, I'm going to represent these items with both the letter and the number. Then I'm going to map out the modes. So we have 7 modes, because it's going to correspond to like all the notes in each of the scales. We can compare it to the major scale, which has 7 notes in it. Each note kind of represents, as we saw in our worksheet, a mode, if we were to build out the mode from that note. And I'm going to label the modes shorthand, just like we do with the notes in the major scale. Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. And I'm going to label them with an uppercase Roman numeral and lowercase Roman numeral, lowercase Roman numeral 4, uppercase Roman numeral 5. And those numbers then are going to tell me if I see, even if I see this number uppercase 4, I'm going to assign that when thinking about modes to the Lydian mode, even if the Lydian mode is being represented in a different mode in a worksheet, right? That's going to be because I'm going to compare everything to the major scale, because that's our general convention. So that's going to be my idea there. And then we have the intervals. So this is going to be the interval numbers. We can have an interval of 0 to 12. These are distances between notes. And then we'll name what those differences are. We'll give the abbreviation. And then we'll try to say, this is giving me both the distance in half steps and the abbreviated name of that interval, which is something that I don't think you see a lot of times, because they just give you the interval and people aren't really looking at the distance. And if you don't know what that is, you're going to confuse yourself. Then we'll build up this table, which will give us the intervals between each step in each scale: whole, whole, or two note, half, whole, half. I'll repeat it: whole, half, whole, half. And this also can be repeated this way: whole, half, whole, half. This worksheet will help us to then use that information to build this over here. And then we have the relative modes. So in other words, I'm going to look at, if I'm looking at the Dorian, this is the first of the Dorian. The first note in the Dorian scale is equivalent to the second of the major scale. the second note in the Dorian scale is related to the third note of the major scale. So I'll map that out, and that will allow me to build this table from that table. We're using X lookups here to do these. So we'll practice our Excel skills to pull this off. So it starts off with the Dorian, and then the 2 is going to be a Phrygian, and then the Lydian. So we'll look at the related modes. That might be confusing right now, but if we build these, I think that'll help us to understand that. And then we'll take a look at the total intervals in terms of half steps from the root note. We're basically pulling this information and then looking at the intervals per step up top to build this. So there's a relationship between those tables. And then we're going to use our X lookup table to take these intervals and name them by cross-referencing that with our table over here. And then we'll use that stuff to build these tables. And so we're using our if logical functions to build these, and our X lookups over here to build these. We're also going to have to use some Roman numerals and lowercase functions to build these. So we'll have some interplay between tables and some interesting formulas from an Excel perspective.